Thank you, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. It's always nerve-wracking to speak in front of your peers, particularly when I look around this room. I've learnt a lot, directly or indirectly, from many of the faces I see, and there are many people I'm looking at who could come up here and do at least as good a job as I'm about to do, if not better. So take that, please, in that spirit. But when you go to Derry, by the way, I don't know what your programme is, my friend, but try and see if you can get Paddy Bogside Doherty to come and talk to you. He's an extraordinary man. You can't get in to see him, but try and get him to come and talk to you about that city. It is quite extraordinary. I'm not going to talk about localism because, like David, I burst a vessel. But one thing that concerns me very much as an urbanist is that whilst I'm all in favour, as we all are, with participatory processes, and I spend many days, weeks and months trying to do them to the best of my ability, I'm more concerned about participatory products, because the built environment sticks around a hell of a lot longer than any particular interest group. And that is what will potentially fail badly at localism, if localism is allowed to see itself through. And of course, having lived and worked in the USA for 5 years, then please don't ever try to tell me that devolving power to smaller groups means it's more democratic. There's no way in hell is that the case. Go and spend your time with homeowners associations in the USA, and it'll take you about 2 hours. So, for me, I agree with what David said, and I'm delighted he went first because he's covered so many things better than I'll be able to cover. But it's true that sustainable development has been defined better than it was in the previous version, but dear oh dear, damning with faint praise. I honestly find the way sustainable development is actually defined in this document to be pathetic, bearing in mind what we actually are faced with in the built environment. And I pick a couple of bullet points, which is probably unfair. Replacing poor design with better design. No. Local planning authorities should positively seek opportunities to meet the development needs of their area. Presumably that's something new, and they haven't been doing that for the past hundreds of. Give me a break. So I'm not a policy planner. I never quite understand. I understand that we need policies just so everything else can sit under them and justify themselves by going back to policy at some particular point in our system. But to me, what a relaxed, self-indulgent exercise writing policy must be. I have this vision of them being in hammocks with gin and tonic. So you say, what about that? Like, that's not so bad. I just can't get my breath when I read this thing, quite frankly. So nowhere to me is sustainable development adequately defined when you realise the state we're in and the world and everything else. And one town I'm working in right now has a few SUs, Sustainable Urban Extensions. You've heard them. And I ask the local authority, lovely people, not only does no one in the local authority have any real idea what it means, or a clear position on it, it's just a SU. You know, we got one here. I said, what? We've got one here, and one here. So what's your problem? Well, they're an extension, but they're neither sustainable nor are they urban. So just call them E's. So there's a tacit assumption that if you name something a SU by some form of osmosis, this is what it will be. Now the reasons I did get was that, well, it's contiguous. Okay, well that's probably a little bit better than if it's not, I suppose. And also it's the last available land we've got. Well, we've got a such system. But one of them, there's no localism because the HCA need to get it out to the market immediately to tick one of their boxes. Because they've got to get the damn stuff started. And localism is a complete pain in the bottom if that's what you're trying to do. So, that's just one town. Maybe I just got unlucky. There's nothing more holistic and therefore less local at a fundamental level than sustainability. You may act locally, fantastic. Transition towns, unbelievable efforts, local efforts. Long may they continue and be even better. And we know the mantra, think globally, act locally, but you have to act globally too. And that demands governance as much, if not more, than it does evolution. Now, the NPPF goes on. Recognise town centres as the heart of their communities and pursue policies to support their viability and vitality. Define a network and hierarchy of centres that's resilient to anticipating future economic change. Can't argue with that, good stuff. So let's leap to core strategies on the strength of those two statements. And again, so many people in here far more able to than I on these matters, so correct me either now or later. So what are core strategies? It seems to me, in my experience in working in several places, and exercising house dumping, wrapped up in fake and forced sustainability assessments, as a post-rationalisation for the choices others make when they submit them, followed by another frantic box-ticking exercise. Nothing to do with sustainable town planning at all, seems to me, i.e. planning a town sustainable. Now, correct my simplistic description. Housing numbers are allocated to counties or regions. They are then distributed within that jurisdiction. And this can be challenged in terms of numbers, of course. But then sites are promoted based on heaven knows what. Is that, no, they're just promoted. And the ones that are promoted are subject to an assessment, because you have to pick a winner. And so you pick a winner, because it's the best one that you've got. Now, the sustainable assessments I've seen in that regard beg a belief because of the level core strategy submissions demand. You cannot carry out a meaningful sustainability assessment of any kind, so you invent one if you are one of the assessors. And I've seen some of the biggest load of bull dust masquerading as a sustainable assessment for a core strategy, with arbitrary ticks and crosses and question marks and dashes in matrices, and you challenge people about it, and my 87-year-old mother could find them on sound, because they're full of crap. And because there isn't enough information given for them to be genuinely assessed as a sustainable assessment by the criteria that we're using today. Not a chance. A winner has to be found, the winner's announced, and there's a preferred option. Now, as an urbanist, excuse me, what is, like all of you here, what is the result of this? A total absence of how and why towns grow as physical things. A total absence is missing from all of this stuff. The vital and sustainable relation between space and movement at a macro, a meso, and a micro level working together never figures in any of this stuff, because the people promoting these sites neither know nor care. Well, the local authority aren't in a position to know or care for on their behalf. They have to assess what comes forward. What a performance! And there's nothing to my mind in the NPPF that tackles that dysfunctional issue about there being no spatial logic in an overall sustainable plan that leads where these things go. Now, because some of what makes it even more tragic right now is because some of the urban extensions are the size of small towns. Whether we agree with that or not, they're the size of small towns. They might not be called that, but that's what they actually are, because if they're not, if it's 4,000 houses, it's a town or it's a housing estate. There's nothing in between. It's a town because it's 4,000 houses. It can't be anything else. Even if it's attached to an existing place, it's effectively the scale and mentality of a town. And I'm involved in several. One of them is bigger than Totnes. It'll be 15,000 people when it's built. Now, the excellent comparator towns work done by people like Yolanda Barnes of Savills will tell you what a place like that ought to support. What it doesn't tell you scientifically is how the original comparator town is structured urbanistically to allow that to happen in a self-organising way. Just assumes it can happen regardless of how it's structured, which to us as urbanism is just the most deranged and stupid approach, I would suggest, to growth. So as a result of this scale, we are building far too many towns in places where towns would never logically go if there were real self-organising town founders were creating them instead of box-ticking planners and box-bashing house builders. So in fact, we're not town planning. We are allocating houses nearly all the time. And so from that point on as urbanists, we're stuffed, regardless of anything else, because the macro, meso and micro relationships in space and form are impossible, because we put something to the side of a town in a place where a town will never logically go. because the people who formed the town wouldn't be that stupid. So the relationship between, you know, for the most part, we build settlements for one reason only. Historically, cross-culturally, patterns of interaction. That's why we build settlements. Exchange in all its forms, trade, psychological exchange, spiritual exchange, friendships, all sorts of things. That's why we build settlements. And so for a truly sustainable environment, we have to maximize the exchange while minimizing the travel necessary to do it. And for us as urbanists, that's the fundamental of sustainability. For us to design places that maximize the exchange while minimizing the travel necessary to do it. Everything else adds to that. But the fundamental of settlement location and settlement form is that. So the core strategy housing allocations have nothing whatsoever to do with global movement and local places that are fundamental to this endeavour. Nothing at all, unless you get lucky. Yeah. So then as urban designers, and a few traffic engineers who get it, and indeed developers, we're pushing the solids uphill from day one. Desperately trying to make a town in the wrong place behave, if at all possible, like a town in the right place. We put so much effort into that. We design and promote mixed use that has a cat in hell's chance of being realised. We illustrate high streets that a retailer with half a brain would never go to because they have no global integration. And we are fooling everyone and ourselves by having to behave at a micro level, pretending to produce and claim the things that demand meso macro scales to have a remote chance of succeeding. And as urbanism, it's a lamentable state. And on top of that, we've fallen yet again into the 1960s Ian McHarg design with nature syndrome, where everything natural is valuated first and then the houses go in the bits in between, regardless of whether the end result is sustainable urbanism or not. And then we give them titles like Green Archipelago. For God's sake. So challenge issues like that today, and you're accused of wantonly destroying the world. But it's a total ignorance of how towns are and need to be once you decide to build them. The NPPF invites us to consider whether it's appropriate to establish green belt around or adjoining any such new development. Well, therefore, if you want an open invitation to segregate new neighbourhoods all over again, there it is. And people will snap at it as soon as given a chance. That's not environmental responsibility, it's a retreat from human interaction, as Richard Sennett describes the fall of public man. And the green belts. What are the green belts for, the NPPF? To check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. The hell they are. If you sprawl on one side of a green belt and sprawl on the other side of the green belt doesn't stop you sprawling. It actually makes it worse. Right? So at least give us something intelligent when you write this bullshit. There's a complete difference between growth and sprawl. Now, to make matters even worse, these places have been built, forgive me, Charmian, by PLC house builders, not town builders. And building town is anathema to house builders because of what they're set up to do, because of how they're structured, how they work, their financial model. It's anathema to them. And all this results in a complete planning cocktail for car-oriented housing estates with green knobs on. Have you been to North Swindon lately? I spent 3 weeks there one afternoon. So my question seeks comfort in asking what in the new legislation stops North Swindon? Does anything? Maybe you can tell me that it does. I don't believe it does. So this to me, I'll finish now, this to me puts urbanism, and you good folk in the academy right at the heart of what is missing, is how towns are, which I borrow quite praiseworthy from Bill Hilliard. It's strategic urban design, if you will. There's no strategic urban design in any of this stuff at all that understands how towns are. And the planning culture generally, not planners, the planning culture generally hasn't a clue because it grew on the back of hating towns. And for me, this new framework misses that issue completely.